So what's next for Francis Ngannou? Now that the dust has settled, I am gutted for Francis Ngannou because he was striving for greatness. Coming from the UFC into boxing, straight to the top. You know, he didn't have any warm-up fights. He went straight to the elite level. And where he's from in Cameroon, people look up to him. He's like a king. You know, he's come from absolutely nothing to becoming a star in the UFC. So he's almost like a symbol of hope. You've also got to give Francis Ngannou a huge amount of credit for taking on the challenge, because he went straight in at the deep end, you know, taking on two of the best in the game. And that takes a huge amount of courage and belief. But maybe that was his downfall. For me personally, it was a difficult one because I've made it quite clear that I'm an AJ fan, but at the same time, I want Ngannou to do well. And if he'd been fighting anybody else, I would have been rooting for him. But unfortunately, it was AJ. Because where he's come from working in the sand mines as a child to become the UFC heavyweight champion of the world, and just what he's achieved in life in general is just amazing. And he's had a really tough ride, so he just really deserves to succeed. Since he's lost to Anthony Joshua, he's had some time to reflect and recently done an interview. Let's take a look.
And everything was great. You know, we had a great training camp. I basically assembled like the best team in the world. And then everybody did his job. We did it great.
It's great to hear Francis Ngannou not making any excuses, because normally a lot of fighters will say they were ill leading up to a camp, they'll say they had injuries, and especially when they get beat the way he did, it would be quite easy to blame it on something.
A lot of experience, a lot of learning process, you know. I had experienced something that I never did.
Francis mentions it was a lot of learning, and this is the problem when you jump straight at the top. You miss out on the valuable experience you gain on the way up. You can't buy experience, and unfortunately, that's why the result ended the way it did.
I remember being even in the locker, trying to warm up, and then, bro, he wasn't going. I was feeling asleep.
He says that he felt asleep, that he was basically tired, but that's quite common on fight day. That's the pressure and the nerves. I've felt like that plenty of times. Being in the changing rooms, warming up for a fight, my arms are heavy, my legs are heavy, but it's just normal. You know, if you ask any other fighter, they'll tell you exactly the same. It's how you channel the nerves, and you just get better at doing it with experience.
Heads up to Anthony Joshua, and heads up to my team too. I was just the one that didn't execute the plan properly.
That's what I love about Francis Ngannou. He's a real guy. He says it the way it is. He gives Anthony Joshua his credit, and he gives his team the credit and says, you know, nobody's fault other than mine. Everyone was present. It was me who didn't turn up.
It's not over yet. Not at all. Like, we just get started. The only thing that we would miss here is time, and I think we have some good amount of time ahead of us as for right now.
So he's made it clear he's down, but he's certainly not out. You know, he's certainly not finished with boxing. But it will be interesting to see how he comes back from a KO like that, because he's never even been hurt in the UFC, never mind being knocked out. So it's going to be interesting to see what he's like on his return.
Than the Fury one, because I was able to deal with the pressure over the 10 rounds. But the Joshua fight, I don't know, I was trying to let it go. He wasn't moving.
Francis talks about the difference from fighting Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. And he says when he fought Tyson Fury, he was able to figure him out and get success. Whereas when he fought Anthony Joshua, you know, he was trying to let it go, but it just wasn't happening. And I did say in the build-up, in my prediction video, that Anthony Joshua was a completely different beast. And we're all seeing how it ended. Anthony Joshua didn't let him build into the fight, gain any confidence, and, you know, and he ended it in a flash.
Would you fight Wilder? Yes, of course. I can still fight anybody. You know, I don't think it's a time to talk about, but I don't think it's time to talk about fight.
He says that he would fight Wilder, and I actually think that might be a good fight for him, because if you've seen Wilder against Tyson Fury, what Wilder struggled with against Tyson Fury was the roughhouse tactics, the way Fury got up close and personal and roughed him up and basically beat him up. Because Wilder can't fight in close, he likes to fight at distance, he likes to have space so that he can get the leverage on his punches, so that he can shoot in from distance and land that devastating backhand. And that's perfect for Francis Ngannou because you're seeing the way he fought against Tyson Fury. He got close and smothered Tyson Fury and basically roughed him up the same way that Tyson Fury roughed Wilder up. So I think that would be a good fight for Francis Ngannou. That's if he can employ those tactics. Because obviously he's got to try to avoid the big backhand from Wilder. But as we're seeing, Francis against Anthony Joshua, he is open to a backhand. So you'd have to make some adjustments to make sure that doesn't happen again. Joe Joyce is another name that I think would be good for Francis Ngannou. Both guys are coming from losses. Well, actually, Joe Joyce recently fought and won. But they're both essentially on a rebuild. Both guys haven't got the best defence, especially Joe Joyce. No disrespect, because he was my old roommate and I've got nothing but love for the guy. But, he can be easily hit. So you've got two big guys, both can punch, both come forward. So I think it'd be a great fight. I also think Derek Chisora would be a great fight for Francis Ngannou because he's tough, he's durable, he comes forward. I think it would be a really exciting fight. I also think that Derek Chisora is a bit of a gatekeeper for the heavyweight division. So if you can get past him, it's a great test. And Derek Chisora never turns down a fight, never turns down a challenge. And I don't think he'll turn down one of them Saudi paychecks. Another great fight would be against Dillian Whyte. Dillian Whyte is still a huge name in boxing. Despite failing a drug test, which is a whole other conversation, at the end of the day he's been given his license back, so it is what it is. But I think it would be a great fight for Francis Ngannou because he's another big guy who really comes to fight. And Dillian Whyte is at the stage where he needs to rebuild and needs another big name on his record. So I think it's just a great fight. But regardless, I think Dillian Whyte would be a great fight because he's big, he's tough. He's not the most technical guy, but he can really fight. So I think it'd be a really entertaining fight. But I actually think that Dillian Whyte would benefit from the fight more than what Francis Ngannou would because he had that suspension where he was out for a long time. But even before then, he had a lot of inactivity. So I think a big name like Francis Ngannou would be good for him. It would also get Dillian Whyte's name on people's tongue, but this time for the right reasons. While we're on the topic of Dillian Whyte, I am happy about his return because I have always supported him. I think he's a great addition to the heavyweight division. He's one of those guys who'll fight anyone. He's as game as they come. And he's been in some great fights. Well, actually, not in one of his more recent fights against Tyson Fury, but I think that was because they were old sparring partners and they knew each other very well. And maybe he knew that Tyson Fury just had his number, and I don't think he really had the belief in that fight. And I also think that Dillian Whyte has been really unlucky because he's beaten some really good guys, and after those wins, he hasn't really got the fights that he should have got, and hasn't really been given the opportunities that he should have got. I think he's been in line for a world title shot numerous times. For one reason or another, it just hasn't materialised. So I do feel sorry for him because he has kind of been left behind, left on the bench when he's been at his peak. And unfortunately, you don't get those years back. And I do question how much he's got left because he's had a lot of inactivity and he's also been in a lot of tough fights and he's been knocked out quite a few times. So I'm just not quite sure if he can reach the heights he once could have. Out of the four names that I mentioned, Deontay Wilder, Joe Joyce, Derek Chisora and Dillian Whyte, it's the Dillian Whyte fight that I do fancy. I don't know why, but I just think it'll be a great fight. And the fact that Dillian Whyte has had the inactivity, I think it might be a good fight for Ngannou. So I don't know, I just really fancy that fight. There's a reason why you start at the bottom and work your way up. Because there's a lot of lessons along the way. It's not just the fights. It's the lessons you learn in training, in your sport, day in, day out. The sparring, working with your coach, working on your craft. You can't skip the levels. That's why you can't go from being in primary school to university. There's a reason for that. You can't miss out on the lessons in between. Francis Ngannou was also mentioned that he might go back to MMA. Well, he actually mentioned that he would do both. And I think that's a huge mistake. You can't be a jack of all trades, a master of none. Well, you can do that in MMA because you've got to learn lots of different fighting styles. But that's okay because it's a level playing field. But in boxing, you've got to be a master at just punching. So he needs to decide which direction he wants to go because he's already at a disadvantage in boxing. So he'd be making a big mistake if he's going to try and juggle the two. And the simple fact is he's achieved everything in the UFC. So I don't understand why you would want to go back. Well, I know it's the PFL, but it's still MMA, but I just don't understand why he'd want to go back. I just don't get it. And at this stage in his life, he's not getting any younger, and I'm pretty sure he wants to make as much money as he can. And I think he'll make a lot more money in boxing, so it just makes total sense. Let me know what you think and what Francis Ngannou next move should be. Please like and subscribe and go watch this video next.